Gandalf the wise old wizard had a little shiny staff, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. Now that's a Middle-earth Christmas special I would absolutely love to see. Speaking of which, actually, hey Warner Brothers, David Zaslav in particular, you wanna make some money?
We're a couple of misfits, we're a couple of misfits. What's the matter with misfits? That's where we fit in. We're not Daffy and Gilly, don't go round willy-nilly. Seems to us kinda silly that we don't fit in.
He went down in history.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows. All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him names. They never let poor Rudolph join in any reindeer games. Then one foggy Christmas Eve, Santa came to say, Rudolph, with your nose so bright, won't you guide my sleigh tonight? Then how the reindeer loved him as they shouted out with glee, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history.
I love this Christmassy time of year, especially when everything is running happy and smooth. Nothing like that year of the big snowstorm. I don't know what we would have done without Rudolph. Rudolph
the Red-Nosed Reindeer!
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer had a very shiny nose, and if you ever saw it, you would even say it glows.
That nose!
All of the other reindeer used to laugh and call him
Look at the beak, how snide.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history.
Won't you guide my sleigh tonight?
On Sunday, December 4th, Burl Ives again tells the exciting news story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer on the General Electric Fantasy Hour. The date, Sunday, December 4th. Join Rudolph in a trip to the island of misfit toys. Meet Yukon Cornelius, the funniest prospector of the North.
Gadzooks, the Bumble Snow Monster of the North strikes again.
Meet Santa's elves and hear 7 original Christmas songs. Burl sings,
Have a holly jolly Christmas, it's the best time of the year. I don't know if there'll be snow, but have a cup of cheer.
it's a holly jolly Christmas special for the entire family. Don't miss Rudolph, Sunday, December 4th, in color on most of these stations.
You know Dasher and Dancer and Prancer and Vixen, Comet and Cupid and Donner and Blitzen. But do you recall the most famous reindeer of all? Hello there, Richard the Film Geek here, and I'm here rather belatedly to help spread the very last bit of Christmas cheer on the channel for another year by giving you guys not just my very first movie review of 2025, but also my very first review of a classic Christmas special courtesy of animation giants Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass. And especially with this particular Christmas special having just celebrated its 60th anniversary last month, what better place for me to start than with the Rankin Bass classic that started it all and officially put them on the animation map for the first time back in 1964, Gandalf the Wise Old Wizard. I'm joking, obviously. Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, which is of course based on the 1949 Johnny Marks carol of the same name, which in turn was based on a children's poem written a decade prior by his brother-in-law Robert L. May. First aired on NBC with sponsorship by General Electric as part of what was called the General Electric Fantasy Hour on the 6th of December 1964, took only 18 months to produce, is technically the second overall time the Rudolph story was adapted for the small and or big screen after the hand-drawn, theatrically released 1948 Fleischer short cartoon, was written by Romeo Muller, directed by Larry Roemer, narrated by the one and only Burl Ives, and features the voice talents of Larry D. Mann, Billie Mae Richards, Paul Soles, and Stan Francis. The story of Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer you'd probably already guess anyway if you happen to sing the carol itself every Christmas. But to those who are still somehow unfamiliar, here's the basic gist. Baby Rudolph is born with a shiny nose that glows bright red whenever he gets overly excited or anxious. His father Donna attempts to cover this up without any real eventual success. He gets laughed at, bullied, called names, and treated like an outcast by the other reindeer. He runs away and sets off on an epic, life-changing adventure outside Christmas Town, alongside fellow misfit Hermie, who aspires to become a dentist rather than a traditional Christmas elf, as well as an eccentric prospector digging for silver and gold named Yukon Cornelius. They end up on the island of misfit toys while constantly on the run from the abominable snow monster of the north, who I'm pretty certain scared the living bejesus out of anyone as a kid. They finally return back home to the North Pole to find that the greatest snowstorm in history has hit and threatens to grind all Christmas Eve operations to a halt. and upon Santa's legendary invite for him to lead his team and guide his sleigh through the stormy night with the use of his glowing red nose, it is up to Rudolph to embrace his ultimate destiny and become the true savior of Christmas he was born to be. So in other words, it's basically Dumbo meets Lion King wrapped up in a little Christmassy bow. Now, long story short, I actually attempted to review this special as part of my original channel for Christmas 2013, but I then quickly realised at the time I was needlessly rushing it. Plus, I didn't really feel personally satisfied anyway with how I did the review, so I had to quickly take it down, and ever since then I'd always procrastinated on the idea of revisiting and or reviewing this special again, at least until today's video. Plus, I should disclose that the earliest childhood memory I have of watching this special for the first time was during Christmas 2003, when the BBC broadcast this special in black and white as opposed to Technicolor. So I would have been 11 years old at that time, of course. And I just naturally remember really enjoying it back then, and especially being stunned and amazed by this ahead of its time stop motion animation, which, by the way, I'm definitely going to talk about a lot later on in the video. And after all, this is coming from someone whose very first introduction to the Rudolph story unfortunately was the mostly god-awful 1998 Good Times Entertainment version on VHS. So, with that being said, and now that I've re-watched this special for technically the third time, but definitely the first time in 12 years, here are my thoughts on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, 1964. Well, for one thing, it's definitely leagues better than both the 98 movie and especially its garbage 2001 CG sequel, The Island of Misfit Toys combined, that's for sure. I mean, what really is there for me to honestly say about this movie that hasn't been said already? Say what you will about the stop motion animation looking a bit dated by today's standards, and especially say what you will about this story promoting and or condoning misogyny, racism, and toxic workplace bullying. But one cannot deny that just like Rudolph himself, this movie is, and always will be, deserving to go down in history as one of the greatest Christmas movies and or specials ever made. There is a damn good reason why this movie is as beloved as it is, why it officially put Rankin Bass on the animation history map for the first time, why it continues to enchant kids and adults alike, even those who never grew up with it, 60 years on from its original broadcast, and why it is deservedly right up there with some of the best known and most essential must-watch movies and or TV specials throughout the Christmas holiday season, alongside the likes of A Charlie Brown Christmas, How the Grinch Stole Christmas, It's a Wonderful Life, Miracle on 34th Street, Home Alone's 1 and 2, Elf, The Polar Express, The Snowman, multiple big and small screen adaptations of A Christmas Carol, The Santa Claus. The list is endless. And that is because, just like, for example, with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, or Mary Poppins, or The Lion King, or Toy Story, or even The Wizard of Oz, this is what I'd like to call a lightning in a bottle type of movie, where everything you need to create a good or even great movie, i.e. a timeless story, memorable characters, a likable and relatable protagonist, a terrifying antagonist, entertaining supporting or side characters, quotable pieces of dialogue, great animation, and a memorable soundtrack that instantly sticks in your head, just all perfectly align and blend together to create something that is bound to be cherished for future generations to come as a work of art. And in the obvious case of this film, Rankin Bass definitely struck gold here. Or should I actually say silver and gold? Look, I'm sorry, I just had to use that joke somewhere in this review. Everything about this movie just oozes the word iconic in every sense. Let's talk first about the story. While understandably there are certain aspects that are very rightly frowned down upon in today's world, such as the extent of the cruelty and bullying towards our two main characters, Rudolph and Hermie, as well as the questionable sexist treatment of the female characters. Ultimately, at the end of the day, what has made this story and the song itself so inspirational, so universal, and so timeless is not necessarily because it goes out of its way to condone and or glorify the act of bullying and discrimination just for the sake of it, but rather because at its core it is basically a classic ugly duckling or underdog story about learning to accept and embrace change and positive difference in society, about how we shouldn't try too hard to pressure those who are physically and or mentally different to us to conform to the status quo and or our own social expectations of them if they don't want to. Which is precisely why towards the end of the movie you get to see those who acted rather shitty towards Rudolph and Hermie at the beginning. Donna, the head elf, even Santa himself actually apologized to these two for the way they acted and the way they treated them up to this point in the story. Plus, it's pretty much established by our narrator that they've come round to realizing that they were in the wrong, that they were the ones that were behaving rather harshly and irrationally, and that they were the ones that needed to learn to listen and understand the reality that there is just as much of a place in the world as everybody else for misfits like Rudolph and Hermie. Larry Roemer shows that he understands and cares passionately about the source material, and he does such a wonderful job of taking what made the original story, song, and concept work so well, and not just expanding upon the story and the characters, but giving it the look, feel, and scope of an epic adventure. Now on to each of these characters, who are all instantly just as iconic in their own right. Starting off, of course, with our titular red-nosed protagonist himself, Rudolph, who is only one of two characters I would consider to be my absolute personal favourite of the entire movie. The other one I'm going to be talking about a bit later. As much as I would love to have seen him rock a thick, shaggy fringe of creamy blonde head fur as an adult, like he does in the 98 version, slightly controversial opinion, I know. And as much as I legitimately question why Rankin Bass made the decision to slightly de-age his character design for the later specials, such as Rudolph's Shiny New Year and Rudolph and Frosty's Christmas in July, I still find this movie's portrayal of Rudolph to be much more adorably endearing, empathetic, and above all, relatable. You instantly feel the emotional pain and trauma he goes throughout the story. The scenes where he is made to feel like an outsider or like he really doesn't fit in anywhere are genuinely heartbreaking. And you end up rooting for him to somehow overcome these emotional obstacles, learn to accept and embrace himself for what he is, and find a way to come out on top and prove everyone wrong. I honestly cannot think of any other voice actor who was better suited for the role of Rudolph than Billie Mae Richards. She does such a flawless job here voicing this character, giving him just the right amount of innocence, adorable awkwardness, pathos, maturity, and emotional conviction. Even more so than I feel Kathleen Barr did in both the 98 version and Island of Misfit Toys, in my opinion. Plus Rudolph's friendship with both Hermie and Yukon Cornelius is just nothing short of pitch perfect. Speaking of which, Hermie is another fun, sweet, likeable, and relatable character in this movie, superbly voiced by Paul Soles, who would later go on shortly after this to be the OG voice of Peter Parker / Spider-Man in the 60s cartoon show of the same name. You completely buy his lack of interest in becoming a toy maker like the other elves, and instead wanting to become a dentist, as well as completely empathize with him when his strict boss and his fellow elves just laugh at him and don't take his aspirations seriously. Plus, I'm perfectly aware that a lot of people have speculated that Hermie in this movie might be secretly gay. And yep, judging from his character design, pretty easy to see why. Yukon Cornelius is such a hoot, a really fun character to watch, and is basically, for all intents and purposes, the Han Solo of this movie. An eccentric, lovable rogue obsessed with digging for silver and gold, who, unlike our two leads, seems to possess a full self-awareness that he is technically a misfit himself, and yet you instantly love his confidence to completely shrug this fact off as if it's no big deal. Larry D. Mann kills it voicing this role. Also, unlike most of the other characters in this story, Yukon doesn't just laugh and or blatantly point out to Rudolph and Hermie how different they are to everybody else. Instead, he just meets them almost by happenstance and lets them tag along on his quest. I also love the running gag where he yells, "Wahoo!" throws his pickaxe onto the snowy ground and licks it only to find nothing. Apparently, according to the original concept for this movie, Yukon was actually searching for peppermint, which is why we get the extra payoff scene at the end, when he finally finds what he's been searching for the entire time. There is also a brief gut-punching moment towards the end, where you're led to believe that Yukon actually sacrifices himself to save our heroes while defeating the abominable snow monster, only to then be thankful and relieved when it turns out that it was only a similar fake-out death to Aragorn's in the Two Towers, and that he and his lazy dogs actually survived the fall due to the Bumble being a ginormous trampoline. Speaking of our terrifying antagonist being the abominable snow monster, aka the Bumble. Granted, he only has a limited amount of screen time in the movie compared to Stormella in the 98 version. Let's just say I completely dig why so many kids booed and or hid behind the sofa in terror whenever this thing appeared on screen. The Bumble is literally Sully from Monsters, Inc. if he had a really bad day, grew out all his fur, grew a sharper set of teeth, and developed a more nightmare-inducing demonic laugh. However, I couldn't help but notice the differing and frankly inconsistent changes in his size throughout the movie. For example, in one shot, he would appear as ginormous as Willie the Giant from Fun and Fancy Free. And then in another shot, he would appear slightly smaller than he needs to be. And it ends up making his physical presence kind of jarring at times. Plus, I may be accused of over-criticizing this little point in the comments. And if that's the case, that's perfectly fine. But one personal gripe that I have is with the frankly rather anticlimactic way the Bumble is defeated and then reformed at the end. I mean, he is shown to have somehow taken Rudolph's family and Clarice hostage in his cave while they're out searching for him. Rudolph bravely demands that he put Clarice down and attempts to take him on. He manages to knock Rudolph out stone cold with one of the catacombs from said cave, is about to make sweet venison out of him, gets distracted by Hermie pretending to make pig noises, only to then be knocked out stone cold himself by a boulder outside, literally ends up getting all of his teeth taken out by Hermie, putting his dentistry skills to effective use, which must be agonizing as hell for him to go through, by the way, is then pushed over the side of a cliff by Yukon, who falls down with him and somehow manages to turn him into a good guy once they bounce back up. He helps put a star on the Christmas tree when everyone returns to Christmas Town, and that's it. Don't get me wrong, I am all for villain redemption arcs as much as the next person, especially if they're executed correctly. But I just honestly thought they could have written this particular redemption arc for the Bumble a lot better. However, does this take me out of the experience? No, not in the slightest. I know a lot of people are going to probably vehemently disagree with me on this in the comments, and honestly, that's also perfectly fine. But strangely enough, I have to say Rudolph's father, Donner, is the most complex and three-dimensional character in the movie. And it greatly helps that he is voiced by Paul Kligman, another actor who would go on to lend his voice to the 60s Spider-Man cartoon show as J. Jonah Jameson. Yes, sure, I agree that he does come off as a bit of an abusive jerk towards his son, and I initially thought the same as everybody else, to tell you the truth. But I've since come round to the idea that he's only displaying this behaviour as a means of protecting his son, even if it means he has to make some parental mistakes along the way in order to do so, because he knows how harsh, cruel and intolerable this community can be to anyone who dares to be different. And thus him forcing Rudolph to cover up his red nose by putting on the fake black nose is his way of saying, I know deep down you don't want to do this, son, but if you really want to socialize and fit in with the other reindeer, even get yourself a girl, this is the only way you can. However, I do still question his reasoning and his logic when he tells his wife, Mrs. Donner, to remain in their cave while he goes out to search for Rudolph by uttering the sexist phrase, "This is man's work." Look, I get that this was a phrase that most husbands said to their wives all the time back then. I mean, the 1950s and 60s were a much more conservative time after all, and a completely different world to the one we live in now. But I feel that he could have said something to the effect of, I love you, but no, you have to remain here for your own safety. I've already lost my son, and of course I know that's my own fault. and I thus know I have to make things right again with him. But I just don't want to risk losing you too. My other personal favourite character in this movie, apart from Rudolph himself, is actually the head elf. Now, I know a lot of people actually want Yukon Cornelius to have his own spin-off movie. And honestly, I wouldn't mind that, don't get me wrong. He is such an eccentric, lovable character in his own right, as I explained earlier. But, come on, this guy is also definitely deserving of his own spin-off movie. Granted, he only has 3 or 4 minutes of screen time in this movie, but the few scenes he is in, as well as his voice, the quotable lines he gives, and the way he constantly berates and verbally talks Hermie down is just so ridiculously freaking hilarious. All up for elf practice! Hermie! Haven't you finished painting that yet? What's eating you, boy? Oh, well, if that's all. What? You don't like to make toys? Hermie doesn't like to make toys. 10 minutes break. Not for you. Finish the job or you're fired. In fact, the only beyond perfect way I can describe this character is he is basically literally Buddy, Will Ferrell's character from Elf. If he grew a goatee, gained a bit of weight from all the candy canes and chocolate syrup he consumes, lost all of his brown curls, and started talking like Danny DeVito's Phil from Hercules. In fact, while I'm briefly on the subject of Elf, let's just say it's not at all hard to see where Jon Favreau got the inspiration for some of the stop-motion animation, the elf costumes, as well as the general look, feel, and aesthetic of that film. Plus the line, "Why weren't you at elf practice?" There is a reason why that line has become such a popular internet meme in recent years. And there's also a reason why I did a recent voiceover edit video as this character. I mean, trust me, I had such a fun time making that video. You have absolutely no idea. That sounded terrible. That tenor section was weak.
Wasn't our fault, boss. Herbie didn't show up.
What?
No, this won't hurt a bit.
Why weren't you at elf practice?
Fixing these dolls' teeth.
Just fix it. Now you listen. We have dolls that cry, walk, talk, blink, and have a temperature. We don't need any chewing dolls.
I just thought I found a way to fit in.
You'll never fit in. Now you come out, practice, and learn how to wiggle your ears and chuckle warmly and go hee hee and ho ho and other important stuff like that. A dentist! Good grief! Even despite having not really as much of a personality to speak of in ridiculous detail, at least in terms of how she's written, I still have to say that Clarice is the sweetest character in the movie by far. I just really love that she seems to be the only reindeer to represent the pure voice of reason in the story. And that instead of joining in with her peers and teasing Rudolph about the way his nose looks, she decides that she likes, maybe even loves Rudolph so much that she is going to look past his nonconformity regardless, is not going to care what everybody else thinks, and just accept Rudolph for who he is. Plus, while it's never really developed or fleshed out in the movie, the romance between Rudolph and Clarice is still so cute and lovely, and just never once fails to make you go, "Aww," every time you see them together on screen. Some of the side characters we get to briefly see for only 1 or 2 scenes in the movie all get to serve at least somewhat of a purpose within the narrative. The young reindeer, for example, serve to perfectly visualize the lyric within the original song about Rudolph being laughed at and called names. Comet, other than sounding like a strange mix between a 1940s sports announcer and the school coach from Greece, is the one who openly expels Rudolph from the reindeer games. Fireball is the one who indirectly introduces Rudolph to Clarice and also accidentally exposes Rudolph's secret to everyone. The elves only serve to be silly and goofy around Santa, as well as openly tease, laugh at, and shame Hermie, adding to his sense of self-reliance, independence, and personal individuality. Clarice's father openly takes a page out of Sarah's dad from The Land Before Time, and forbids his daughter from romantically associating with, in his words, a red-nosed reindeer, thus further adding to Rudolph feeling alone and isolated shortly before he and Hermie meet. And the misfit toys themselves, such as Charlie in the Box, Dolly for Sue, and the Spotted Elephant, are a small group of individuals who have taken refuge on the island in wait for the time when Santa would eventually arrive, pick them up, and deliver them to children, because they feel cast out, abandoned, discarded and unwanted. Thus they truly serve as a literal visual metaphor to both Rudolph and Hermie of the fate that could potentially await both of them should they choose to continue running away from their problems, refuse to confront whatever personal issues they have head on, and remain on the island themselves. There isn't really an awful lot for me to say about King Moonrazer, other than, funny name for a start, and his character design is very much how even I would imagine Mufasa's ghost to look like if he wore a large crown on his head and grew wings. Plus, he becomes an effective plot device for Rudolph's character journey and motivates him to want to return to Christmas Town by providing him with this new mission to tell Santa that the misfit toys are in dire need of help. And trust me, I am going to talk about the ending towards the end of this review. Don't you worry. If I were to be asked, though, who I think the biggest jerk character in this movie is, albeit a rather ironically hilarious one in one's own opinion, I would have to say it is without a doubt this movie's depiction of Santa himself brought entertainingly to life by the voice of Stan Francis. The way he delivers his lines, the way he is animated and designed, his initial reaction to Rudolph's nose at the beginning with the line,
Great bouncing iceberg.
his visible frustration and annoyance at having to hear the We Are Santa's elf song, and especially his chemistry with Mrs. Claus, particularly the running gag where she's basically kindly body shaming him by constantly forcing him to eat because he looks skinnier than a twig, and because, well, children generally expect to see a fat Santa anyway, so to be fair, she kind of does have a point. Never fails to crack me up. While most Christmas stories usually portray Santa Claus as the lovable, jolly old man we know and love, I mean, of course we do, as if that's even a question. And in fact, a majority of the later Rankin Bass specials would go on to portray this character in a much kinder and likeable light, starting with Santa Claus's coming to town. It's actually almost shocking that we get to see a Santa behave the way this one does in this movie. I mean, you have this cute young reindeer with a red nose being mercilessly picked on and mocked by his peers. And yet, what is Santa's response to this? Instead of showing true kindness and compassion by de-escalating the situation, he just berates and shames Donna before walking off. And it's not even until he finally miraculously discovers the true value of Rudolph's nose that he just invites him to lead his sleigh team anyway. Let me get this straight, Santa. After putting Rudolph through so much trauma and torment up to this point, that's your way of saying sorry to him. What the hell? That is definitely you earning a spot on your own naughty list right there, pal. Also, how can one possibly forget about another iconic character in this movie being our narrator, Sam the Snowman? Both sung and voiced magnificently by the legendary Burl Ives. The moment this snow dude arrives on screen, you instantly know you're in for something special. Admittedly, there are a few times where he can slightly interrupt the pace to break into song or break the fourth wall, very similarly, in fact, to Gonzo as Charles Dickens and Rizzo in The Muppet Christmas Carol. But aside from that, his line delivery and his warm, huggable demeanour just perfectly help to give him this lovely air of your kindly grandfather telling you a bedtime story. While it may understandably be perceived by some nowadays to look a bit glitchy, jittery, and especially weird, it is still obviously hard for one to deny that the biggest compliment you have to give this movie, without question, is the stop motion animation, which, even for a little animated film that was only made in the mid-1960s, surprisingly still holds up to this day, is so indescribably ahead of its time and so damn impressive to look at, especially when you consider the fact that it was all done in Japan instead of the United States, and even more awesomely by some of the animators, including Hayao Miyazaki himself, who would go on to found Studio Ghibli, the legendary creators of such classics as My Neighbor Totoro, Grave of the Fireflies, Princess Mononoke, The Boy and the Heron, and Spirited Away, is whimsical, magical, and charming in its own unique way. It feels like a children's storybook beautifully brought to life, and literally like you're watching a child act out the story using toys. very similarly to what we see during the epic opening sequence of Toy Story 3, for example. It gives you that warm, feel-good, Christmassy feeling that you need from a movie like this. And it is relatively easy to tell how much blood, sweat, tears, effort, handiwork, and craft went into making this animation as insanely good as it is. This soundtrack by the original songwriter Johnny Marks, and not just the incidental score by Maury Laws, is the pure definition of the term classic. Almost each of the musical numbers here, such as Jingle, 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 You Will Hear My Sleigh Bells Ring, I Am Old Kris Kringle, I'm the King of Jingling. See what I mean? We are Santa's elves. My personal favourite. We're a couple of misfits. We're a couple of misfits. What's the matter with misfits? That's where we fit in. Which actually, for a brief period of time, believe it or not, was replaced by an alternate song titled Fame and Fortune. Silver and gold. There's always tomorrow, the most wonderful day of the year. Have a holly jolly Christmas. And of course the title song, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, are just absolute bangers that you instantly find yourself singing along to once they start, and just never leave your head afterwards. Now it's finally time to talk about the ending. Apparently the ending we get in the movie, where Santa finally arrives on the island of misfit toys, with Rudolph leading the charge to pick up all the misfit toys and deliver them to new homes. All perhaps save one, who is accidentally killed off by one of the elves, or so they say, never even happened in the original broadcast. Instead, the toys were only mentioned as being Santa's first stop before the big sleigh ride in the finale, and that was it. Apparently, from what I've managed to research, children were so disappointed and let down by this that nothing was seen to be done on screen to help the misfit toys, that they wrote tons of written complaints and letters to the producers. So in immediate response to this, before the 1965 broadcast, Rankin Bass had to animate the much better ending we've thankfully still got to this day. And it makes for just the perfect happy ending to this movie, as well as a cute and satisfying resolution to the misfit toys' little arc in the story. And this was even way before fan input on social media, well, became the thing it is today. way, which really goes to show that sometimes fan input like this is not always a bad thing, and it actually can be a great asset to a product rather than solely a detriment to said product. As for how I would personally retell this story in some form, I'd have it be stop motion animated Aardman style, as opposed to being traditionally hand-drawn or CGI. I'd retain the same basic story structure and conflict from this movie, albeit slightly different, but at the same time I'd further expand and or improve on the story and the characters. For example, I'd retain pretty much the same ensemble cast from this movie, like Hermie, Yukon, Comet, Mrs. Claus, etc. I'd also have Hermie and the head elf be secretly related as father and son. Thus, I would have the head elf go out searching for his runaway son at the same time as Donna, and that's where both characters decide to meet up, bond over their common harshness towards their offspring, and go searching for the both of them together. I'd also have Clarice and Mrs. Donna play much more of an active role in the story rather than fade into the background. Fireball, I'd basically keep the same as he is in terms of personality in this movie, except in this instance he meets a rather unfortunate, shockingly dark, grisly end, and is actually made sweet venison out of by the bad guy. With Rudolph himself, I'd basically retain the same character design and personality that he has from this movie, but the only new physical addition I'd make to his design as an adult is have him grow a thick, shaggy fringe of head fur akin to his 98 design. As for the Bumble, I'd actually almost give him a similar arc to Old Man Frank and or the Pigeon Lady in Home Alone's 1 and 2, and make him a misunderstood creature who's been only publicly made to be a monster because of his size, but deep down is a ginormous kid at heart who becomes attracted to Rudolph's nose because it represents the joy, hope, and optimism he's been lacking for some time, and eventually strikes an unlikely friendship with Rudolph. But it's with my particular characterization of Santa that I'd make the biggest and most substantial change. Instead of having one Santa throughout the story, I'd actually have two different Santas. One who is actually much closer to Mickey Rooney's take on the character in Santa Claus is Coming to Town, Someone who feels like a natural outcast himself due to his weight, and actually befriends Rudolph, Hermie, and Yukon on their adventure, and along the way eventually becomes the Santa Claus that we know, and thus the one who invites Rudolph to lead his team at the end of the story, and the other gradually revealed throughout the story to be the main villain, albeit with a terrifyingly top-secret Yuletide twist. I'd still certainly have him get his deserved downfall and be defeated at the end. But unlike with both the Bumble and Stormella, I'd have my villain stay irredeemably evil. Plus, likewise with Palpatine in the prequels, for example, who publicly pretends to be this mild-mannered, harmless politician while skillfully hiding the pure evil Sith mastermind he truly is. This Santa is basically a corrupt politician / dictator who puts on a public persona, to be sure, by behaving the way he does in this movie, whilst skillfully breaking his promises behind the scenes, sort of doing what the traditional Santa is supposed to do, you know, in terms of delivering toys to the nice children and coal to the naughty ones, but in reverse, and hiding his true, pure evil, monstrous nature. And that's honestly pretty much all I can disclose about how I would personally retell this story. For now. In conclusion, I've actually even surprised myself with how much I've probably gushed about this movie in ridiculous detail, as well as probably gave it the full justice it deserved than I honestly expected to while writing this review. Which actually, I guess, goes to show how much I legit love this movie. I honestly don't know yet if any of the other Rankin Bass specials are going to top this. Except maybe perhaps for Santa Claus's Coming to Town. We'll see when we eventually get to that one. But I have to say, this is by far one of their finest works, as well as definitively one of the greatest Christmas movies and or specials ever made. It is so amazing to think that they managed to cram in this much story, this much world building, and this much character development into the space of just over 50 minutes that just flies by and only feels like 10, thus making for quite the easy viewing experience. It instantly gets you into the Christmas spirit every time you watch it, and even despite some of the animation and some of the dialogue not aging well today, this is still, without a doubt, a definite must-watch during the festive holiday season that I would definitely highly recommend to the whole family, with the biggest festive smile on my face. And with all that being said, Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer 1964 is wholly deserving of its status as a true Christmas classic. It abso-freaking-lutely deserves to indeed go down in history alongside the likes of Chicken Run, Coraline, Wallace and Gromit, and The Nightmare Before Christmas as a true landmark in stop-motion animation. And of course it's deserving of my overall rating, which is going to be a full 10 out of 10. Don't forget to do the following few things as always. Leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer 1964. Subscribe to my channel. Click on the little bell to receive any emailed notifications and/or updates from the channel. If you haven't already, you can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Letterboxd, and Blue Sky. Do take care, everyone. And for the very last time this year, have a holly jolly Christmas.
Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, you'll go down in history.
Well, it needs work. I have to go.